Hello, I'm John Nicholson. Welcome to my YouTube channel. I thought this week we might talk about the by-election in Scotland. The results are in and Labour unexpectedly has won Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse. Now, the by-election had a very sad cause. It was caused by the unexpected death of the much-loved local MSP. She was loved across parties and she lost a battle with cancer, and the tributes that came into her after she died certainly made me wish that I'd known her and known her well, rather than just knowing her to say hello to as I did. She sounded like a wonderful person. But all the pundits were calling the by-election for the SNP. Now, remember last time that there was an election in this constituency was at last year's general election. It was an SNP held seat and the SNP lost heavily to the Labour Party. And this is a by-election for Holyrood, the Scottish Parliament. And the SNP, as you know, has been going through its travails, but the leadership of John Swinney has seen the party's fortunes steady, and everybody, including the bookies and the pundits and the pollsters, thought that the SNP would win, Labour would come third, and that a reform surge would lead them into second place. That was where the bookies' odds went. But unexpectedly, after a very unpleasant campaign, the Labour Party emerged victorious. Now, not by a great deal. The figures are that they won around 31%. The SNP won round about 30%. Reform came third in the end, and then the Tory vote collapsed, with all of it pretty much going to Reform. Now, a lot of commentary this morning saying this is a triumph for the Labour Party. Keir Starmer is very excited about it. Anis Sarwar is excited about it. And lots of SNP people are, as you'd expect, very disappointed. So I thought we would look at what this means, what it means for the independence movement and the future of the SNP. Now, the SNP has been going through a very difficult time. After the leadership of Alex Salmond, of course, then came Nicola Sturgeon. Nicola Sturgeon and Alex Salmond had a very dramatic falling out. Alex Salmond went to trial over allegations of sexual misconduct. He was acquitted. He set up his own party. Nicola Sturgeon was arrested, but then the charges were not supported and the case was dropped. But the case is still proceeding against her former husband. All of this made things very, very difficult indeed for the SNP. And last year at the general election, the SNP did very badly. Labour surged to victory on a promise of change. But I think it's fair to say there's been huge disappointment in the performance of the Labour government over a host of issues. The closure of Grangemouth, it promised that it wouldn't close Grangemouth, we support it, but it broke that promise. The winter fuel allowance, which it withdrew, and obviously that really matters in Scotland. Supporting the two-child benefit limit, which again caused huge disappointment in Scotland, and of course breaking Labour's promises to WASPy women. So a host of things that has seen the Labour Party's popularity collapse. But nonetheless, here in Hamilton, in a tightly fought contest, it squeaked a victory. Now, a number of mistakes were probably made. First of all, the SNP made the whole election about the Reform Party. The SNP said it's a two-horse battle between us and Reform. And they gave Reform a great deal of publicity. And I thought at the time that was unwise. And I think when the analysis are conducted and the post-mortems take place in the party, I think there will be a general agreement that to talk up Reform in the way that happened was probably unwise. Reform isn't doing especially well in Scotland by comparison with the rest of the UK, and there's a number of reasons for that. But I think it would be silly to pretend that there's not a regressive, socially conservative, racist, homophobic, transphobic element in Scottish society? Of course there is. I mean, some people in Scotland voted for Brexit as well. So although Nigel Farage might not be personally popular in Scotland, there is a right-wing, socially conservative, older vote that reform can attract, and is attracting, mostly at the expense of the Labour Party and the Conservative Party. And that's what we've seen happen. The Tory vote collapsed. But another question, surely, for any post-mortem in Scotland, and it's worth saying, incidentally, that the Labour Party candidate in this by-election was probably one of the worst candidates I've ever seen, stutteringly inarticulate and unable to answer any questions. He hid from the press and was hidden away by his party managers. He's like a throwback to the kind of old Labour lobby fodder that were replaced in 2015 in most Scottish constituencies. But nonetheless, he's emerged victorious. I don't think we'll see much of him going forward at Holyrood. But, as I say, when postmortems are being conducted, one question needs to be asked, and it's this. With independence increasing steadily in the polls, now in the mid-50s, perhaps even a little more, how come the SNP, the party of independence, only attracts 30% in a by-election, and yet support for independence is at the mid-50s? Now, some supporters of independence will support the Green Party, but that's not a huge percentage. Some will support Alex Salmond's Alba Party, but they're pretty much on the point of collapse, I'd say. They're 1%, 1.5% in the polls. There's a lot of supporters of independence who are simply staying at home. And that's a real problem for the SNP. How can it get independent supporters to vote for the SNP, the party of independence? Now, there's disillusionment, inevitably. The party's been in power for a very long time, and it's not normal in a democracy for any party to remain in government indefinitely. So that's a problem. There's a problem too, of course, because of the split between Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon. People didn't quite understand it. There was lots of stories in the hostile press about camper vans and all sorts of nonsense that turned out not to be true in the main. But nonetheless, that had an effect on the SNP. And then there was a very divisive leadership election as well that saw Humza Yousaf triumph and then within a year leave office after falling out with his Green coalition partners. But as we head towards an election next year in the Scottish Parliament, the SNP and the SNP leadership have got to sit and think intensively about how they're going to persuade independent supporters to go out and vote for the SNP, because if they don't vote for the SNP, Westminster is going to turn around and say, well, look, Scots have gone passive again. They don't really care about independence. You know, they make a lot of noise periodically and then they settle down calmly. It's blindingly obvious that the only route to independence is for the SNP to win an election and for maximum pressure to be put on Westminster for there to be an independence referendum. Because if Scotland really is truly part of a union of equals, if the Holyrood Parliament votes for an independence referendum and Westminster says no, then Scotland's a colony. Scotland's not part of a union of equals. It's only a union of equals, it's only an equal marriage if one of the parties is allowed to depart without the permission of the other party. Otherwise, Scotland is held prisoner. I think most Scots know that. But what the SNP leadership has got to do is put fire in the belly, not only of the party itself, but the Scottish electorate. At next year's election, they're going to face an unpopular Labour government, an unpopular Keir Starmer, and an unpopular Scottish Labour leader, Anis Sarwar. So, when the analysis takes place, people at the SNP leadership have got to work out how to inspire passion. And it's important, I think, for party supporters not to become despondent. If yesterday's by-election, the by-election we've seen in Hamilton, if it was to be translated all across the country, and it's not a sensible thing to do because Hamilton is not typical of constituencies all across the country. It's not a bellwether in any sense. But even if it were, the SNP would still beat Labour overall at a Holyrood election next year. But it's not enough just to win. The SNP has to win big if its hopes of holding second independence referendum, which I think would be won by the pro-independence forces. If that's to be happen, the SNP has to win big. Thank you very much for watching, and thank you for your support for my channel. Please carry on subscribing, and please do give me your comments below. I always love to hear from you, and I'm always happy to answer your questions.